What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you'll never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, September 8th, 2017. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. And we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And, of course, a program reminder, in our third hour today, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us with her unique perspective on world events. So we've got that to look forward to as well. So let's get right on into the news here. Obviously, Hurricane Irma uppermost on pretty much everybody's mind right now. The predicted storm track for the eye of the hurricane has again shifted slightly to the west. And so now it's still going up the middle of the state, but a little more westerly than they had feared. And, of course, it could still wander all over in the next couple of days here because it's not expected to make landfall on Florida till Sunday. But there's no question the state of Florida is about to take a real serious pounding there. The storm is absolutely huge, and even if the eye misses you, you're going to be dealing with storm surge. Hurricane-level winds are radiating out about 50 miles on either side of the eye right now. Now, it has weakened a little bit. It's down to a Category 4 hurricane right now. So that's a little bit of good news, but it's definitely going to be a major problem. And the governor of the state of Florida is out there saying, you got to get out of the way. And you got to be leaving right now, and already there's gridlock on the highways from people who only started taking this stuff seriously today. And basically, Florida is rapidly turning into a ghost state, and the Floridians are stuck in this bumper-to-bumper traffic trying to flee the storm, especially after seeing the damage that it did to these Caribbean islands, and killed at least 18 that they know of in the Caribbean, and that number is probably going to go on up because they haven't even begun to clear away the wreckage from all these destroyed buildings. So it's going to be nasty here, and right now we're looking at the greatest evacuation in history. 650,000 people have been ordered to leave Florida. Not just get out of a city here or there, get out of the state. Get out of the way of this thing. And it is a monster storm, and of course they're concerned about storm damage going into Georgia, storm surge in the Carolinas, and they're expecting the storm surge could be as high as 20 to 28 feet in certain areas. And to put that in perspective, that is roughly equivalent to Hurricane Katrina, which had a storm surge of about little under 28 feet. So that's where we are. This is a major, major storm. Now, a lot of people look back at Hurricane Andrew and the vast amount of damage it did to residential property. But Hurricane Irma is poised to overshadow that storm back in 1992 because there's so much more to destroy. Because South Florida has seen this huge construction boom in the last 2 decades. A lot of people moving to Florida, especially retirees, and looking out over the counties of Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. At one point, cranes were the unofficial bird of the state. And there's a huge bunch of newly built homes right in the path of this storm. And I hope they were built up to code, but how do you have code for something this powerful and this destructive? Now, turning over to Hurricane Jose, they're predicting it to reach Category 4 strength within hours, and unfortunately, it is aimed right at Bermuda, and that's going to be, again, a serious, serious problem. This is a disaster. There's no other way to describe it. Now, the United Arab Emirates is sending $10 million to help the people of Texas recover and rebuild from Hurricane Harvey, which is a very nice thing for them to do. And the Senate, meanwhile, has doubled Trump's request for hurricane spending, passing a $15 billion with a B disaster aid package. That's the good news. Unfortunately, the bill also carried with it raising the debt limit, allowing the government to just borrow more money like crazy. and funds the government for an additional 3 more months because they were on the verge of running out of money over there. Now, I have to tell you, one of the things, I guess a disaster like this is going to bring out both the best and the worst in the people. And the best is all these photos that you see of total strangers trying to help each other without regard to skin color, without regard to gender or orientation or any of that stuff. Just get out of the water, get safe, get to a high ground. And that's the best that we can see in people. And then you have the absolute worst, the scammers, the crooks, and the looters, and people who just want to mess with people's heads at a time when they're dealing with this impending disaster. We're going to do a quick shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just joining the network, obviously talking about all these storms that that are hitting the Caribbean, Florida, Bermuda, Mexico, so forth and so on. Somebody started posting a fake map for Hurricane Irma all over social media, saying that Irma was actually going to skip past the tip of Florida and hit Houston again. And everybody in Houston was getting into a panic over this thing. It's a completely bogus map. Somebody just made it up on Facebook, made it look like it was coming from a TV network, and they posted it as a joke. They think it's funny. There's nothing funny about traumatizing already traumatized people. It's mean, it's cruel, it's petty, it's childish. And as if Mexico wasn't dealing with enough problems with the damage from Hurricane Katia, they got hit by a powerful 8.1 magnitude earthquake just off the southern coast of Mexico, really close to the tectonic plate zone. Tsunami warnings were issued all along the coastline there. We actually got notified here in Hawaii to expect a tsunami, but it was only 1/3 of a meter high, so they didn't sound the sirens or anything like that. But still in all, it's like the earth is just getting tired of all of this nonsense we humans are up to, and it's just saying, get off already. Now, somebody shot an amazing video of these flashes of light in the clouds above Mexico during the quake. And according to National Geographic, scientists in 2014 wrote a paper suggesting that such lights were caused by electrical properties of certain rocks. And when you think about an earthquake where you have these two masses of rock sliding past each other, you're going to get a huge amount of static electricity. And what's really interesting is the very first major quake I experienced was the Sylmar quake, after my family had moved from New Hampshire out to California, and we were there for the Sylmar quake. And I remember seeing those lights in the sky. And at the time, I just thought it was downed power lines sparking and arcing. But I was looking at this video that they shot in Mexico and saying, yeah, that's exactly what I saw there. So it's an interesting little phenomenon going on over there. Comcast, for some reason, everybody's using the storm for their own agenda. Comcast is now blaming Hurricane Harvey for a massive subscription loss. Oh my goodness, we've lost our subscribers, our revenues are down, gosh darn that storm, and so forth and so on. Now, getting into the domestic politics, we mentioned this, we teased this a little bit yesterday, about how there was a huge number of out-of-state voters that came into New Hampshire. Now, New Hampshire is one of the states that allows same-day registration. You can show up and register on the day of the election and then be allowed to vote. And apparently there were these people who were coming on in with out-of-state driver's licenses saying, we just now moved here, we haven't got our new licenses, we want to register to vote. And apparently there was something like, well, there were thousands and thousands of them. And as it turns out, these people hadn't moved to New Hampshire. They had simply driven in from other states, and it looks like they changed the outcome of the New Hampshire election, both for the U.S. Senate seat and for the presidential election itself. So again, our elections are a disgrace. They're an absolute joke, and Trump has got to do something about this, or he's going to be a one-term president. Now, Hillary Clinton is out there trying to make a lot of noise and still attract attention. Apparently, she's addicted to fan worship or something like that. And she managed to get herself on the cover of Time magazine for its Women Who Are Changing the World issue. And she's out there saying, you know, pay attention to me, forget Obama. My story is just as inspiring as anybody else. And apparently in this article in Time, she's blaming sexism for her election loss. Oh, it's those men who couldn't bring themselves to vote for a woman. That's not what was going on. There are a lot of women I'd love to see as president. Cynthia McKinney, for one. Our former governor, Linda Lingle, would have made a great president. We just didn't like Hillary Clinton, not because she's a woman, because of what she and her husband have done over the last 30 years. So she's out there with her book tour for her new book, What Happened, and she's on this cross-country sales pitch, and she kicked it off in New York. And finally, the Democrats, they're fed up. They're just saying she wished she would just dry up and go away because she's become an albatross around the neck of the Democratic Party. And even Senator John McCain, who's a good friend of the Clintons, said, I respect and admire and am a friend of Hillary's, but with these kinds of things happen in life, you've got to move on. Hillary will not let go. She's going to turn into this really bitter old lady, you know, living in the rest home in the wheelchair saying, I could have won. If it weren't for those men, I could have won. Now, getting on back to the email scandal, we are seeing an article that basically confirms that the NSA has all of Hillary Clinton's deleted emails, along with Platte River, the server company, and Datto. They have all 30,000 deleted emails. Now, it came out last week that the NSA had offered those deleted emails to James Comey, and he said he wasn't interested. And this, of course, dovetails with the revelation that Comey was writing his justification for exonerating Hillary Clinton even before interviewing any of the witnesses or collecting any evidence. It was never going to happen. Comey was not going to let it happen. And it appears that he was being directed in this direction from above, meaning the White House. Here's the interesting part. Corporate media is actually starting to report on this draft document that Comey wrote back in like April of last year to exonerate Hillary Clinton. At least Fox News was covering it. So when we make a big enough noise about something in the independent media, the corporate media has to follow along sooner or later. All right, let's grab ourselves a phone call. Kevin in West Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I wanted to call in and talk to you about hurricanes, but you got on the subject with Comey and Hillary and everything. One of the Aiea brothers just got off a house arrest and is down in Florida.
Yes.
I hope he don't, quote unquote, disappear in this hurricane.
Yeah, that's a real situation because it looks like his dead man switch was that laptop, and the police now have it. But he's definitely a live liability for the Clintons, and live liabilities don't stay alive very long around the Clintons. So it's hard to imagine somebody locating him. I can't imagine he's staying in the place he was supposed to be living in. If he's smart, he's in his car on the way out of the path of destruction.
Right, he had went to court about something about getting the GPS taken off of him so he could get out of Florida. But as far as I know.
Well, those GPS anklets, I guess you could call them, they work through the cell phone system. So if the cell phone system goes down, and it will during a hurricane, nobody will be able to find him, even if he's still wearing it.
Absolutely. The other thing, now I can't shake this off of my mind, and I know everybody's going to jump up, conspiracy, but we have the ability to manipulate the weather and everything.
Well, wait a minute. There's been some minor success with cloud seeding to generate rain, which has generated lawsuits from the people downwind who feel that their rain was being stolen. But when you look at the amount of energy it takes to create something like a hurricane, it is way beyond the technology of humans to do, and will be for a very, very long time.
You don't think that we could possibly steer it?
The only time I've seen a hurricane be either steered or just blown apart is earlier this year. We had a couple of hurricanes come through Hawaii, and they came right in over the Big Island on the south side over the active volcanoes. And that huge updraft of air literally tore those storms apart. But again, it's a huge amount of energy that we simply cannot duplicate. Even with nuclear weapons, you can't put that much heat in the air.
Okay. Well, I didn't know if you had known about the A1, being off of, house arrest and had flipped. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz, I had heard, is under criminal investigation now, too.
Well, I would certainly like to see something happen there. But again, we've got our second Attorney General in a row that doesn't seem interested in pursuing this. We have our second FBI director in a row that doesn't seem interested in doing this. Mueller is out there trying to do a hatchet job on Trump and absolutely nothing else. And the request by Congress for a second special counsel to look into the Hillary scandals is being ignored. So the deep state is in a panic, but, they're all going to pull together to protect that narcocracy at the heart of our government.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your time, sir, and I hope you have a great, wonderful show and a great day.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin. We're going to let you go here. All right, let's turn over to the war zones, emphasis on the plural. And once again, U.S. aircraft have been spotted and videoed evacuating ISIS field commanders from Deir ez-Zor to quote-unquote safer regions. And this is coming from a couple of different sources, southfront.org, which apparently now has been banned from YouTube. And Press TV is also reporting on the same thing. Gee, I thought Daesh or ISIS, they were supposed to be the bad guys. Remember all those videos of people pretending to be beheaded? And they were just out there. Oh, these are the bad guys. These are the reason we're in Syria. And here we have the U.S. evacuating these senior commanders. Obviously, they need to use them someplace else, probably down in the Philippines or up in Afghanistan, to justify invasions there. Now, here's a very bizarre story, and this came out of Russia today. At a meeting with the Emir of Kuwait, U.S. President Donald Trump claimed to have very little to do with Syria, but would be very upset if it turned out the government was using chemical weapons. In other words, they're telegraphing another false flag gas attack. And before they get down that road, we need to remind you all that that last one in Idlib never made any sense to begin with. To find out if you're being lied to, look for what should be there and isn't. And what was missing from that story was a motive for Assad to do something that stupid. He was winning the war against these U.S.-backed terrorists. The world was coming to accept that Assad was going to stay in power. Even the White House had said, yeah, we're ready to accept this new political reality. Why would Assad at that moment do the one thing that would allow the U.S. to scream bloody murder and start bombing his country again, which is exactly what happened? It never really made any sense. Now, the United Nations is out there with a new report trying to claim that, yes, it was the Syrian government that gassed those people at Idlib, but it turns out there is a huge hole in their story. Because basically the entire claim that Syria was behind it was that a Syrian military aircraft was spotted departing the Shayrat air base. But it turns out that that spotting took place hours after the sarin gas, or whatever was actually used, attack took place. It's a big logic hole. The UN is doing the bidding of the U.S. yet again. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And as news of the U.S. evacuating, saving ISIS commanders from Deir ez-Zor spreads, obviously they have to get back out there and try and remind everybody, these are the bad guys. You got to hate these people because everywhere ISIS shows up, we're going to invade. We're going to send your children off to fight them. So now Israeli experts are out there saying that Daesh has a new terror tool. They're going to be using poisons in shopping malls, like our economy isn't all retail Mageddon isn't bad enough already. But this is all this really is. They're going to be back out there with the propaganda to remind us all that ISIS are evil. And anywhere ISIS shows up, like Afghanistan or the Philippines or wherever, we have to go on in and we have to invade that country for their own good, to save them from the evil ISIS. And yet we have these constant, ongoing, repeating reports about how every time ISIS is going to be cornered, the U.S. troops get in the way of the Syrian army. They open a corridor to let them through, or in the current case, they're airlifting them out in helicopters. Another article coming out of Dark Moon. Panic in Tel Aviv, is Netanyahu losing it? And they're talking along the same lines that I was a while back. Netanyahu is really facing a lot of heat over this corruption scandal. And anytime a president gets into trouble, they love to start some kind of a war to distract everybody from it. And to remind everybody, you don't change the leaders. When there's a war going on, you have to stick with the leader. And again, look at what Clinton did when Monica Lewinsky was testifying before the Congressional Committee about the stained blue dress. She walked out of the hearing expecting to find a phalanx of the media, and all she saw were empty steps, because while she'd been in there testifying, President Clinton had gone off and ordered cruise missile attacks into a couple of countries in the Mideast, claiming they were destroying biological weapons laboratories. In one case, they hit a mosque, and they hit an aspirin factory, which you, the taxpayers, got to pay to rebuild, by the way, along with the million-a-shot cruise missiles. And so it looks like Netanyahu is personally endeavoring to reignite the Syrian war, even though more and more people are saying this thing is over, Assad has won. And Israel's launching these airstrikes on Syria, trying to get Assad to do something, to respond, in order to escalate it and justify bringing the United States in. And Assad is just being patient. He's waiting it out. He's not responding. He's not taking the bait. And the more Israel goes on in and attacks Syria, the more obvious it is Israel is the provocation, not Syria. Now, Syria is still playing by the rules. The Syrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and expatriates have sent letters to the Secretary General of the United Nations and the President of the UN Security Council asking for the United Nations to put an end to the illegal Israeli violations of its airspace and bombing of its military positions. And pointing out that the Syrian army is really responsible for the destruction of ISIS, at least within Syria, and that's obviously going to benefit the whole world. And Israel seems intent on bombing those military positions that are a threat to ISIS. So it's a very, very complex picture over there. Interestingly enough, after 6 years, France all of a sudden wants to pull the plug on Libya. And French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian said that he noticed positive developments that might help end the Libyan crisis. And what's really going on, of course, is France has got upcoming elections, and all of these wars are very unpopular with voters. And so they want to de-link and get away from it, let it fade into history, or otherwise the incumbent parties are going to be in serious, serious trouble. All right, we're going to take another break here for some commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And interesting article that came out over at Zero Hedge, and it echoes something I was saying earlier in the week. Why the War Party loves to call foreign leaders insane. And basically reiterates the same message. If the U.S. government decides it doesn't like a foreign government, it's something of a tradition for U.S. politicians and the media to portray those leaders as irrational, unhinged, or downright insane. They're a danger to the world. And they did that to Saddam Hussein. They did it to Milosevic. They're doing it to Assad, and now they're doing it to Kim Jong-un. And every time I have somebody come up to me and say, well, that Kim Jong-un, he's dangerous, he's insane, he's crazy. I said, oh, really? Have you met him? Like Dennis Rodman. They said, no, I just got it off the TV news. I said, so your entire opinion of Kim Jong-un comes from the very same people who told you Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons, and you're going to believe it? Every time the U.S. wants to go to war against somebody, you're going to see it almost telegraphed. There'll be movies that will demonize the people, demonize the country, demonize the culture. Oh, they're evil because they don't live the way that we do. And, of course, portray all their leaders as psychotic, wacko crazies. In fact, I remember back when Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came on out, and it was a very obvious Russia bash there. And I remember thinking, okay, we're going to start getting hostile to Russia. By golly, it sure as heck happened, didn't it, here? Now, as you know, the U.S. attitude toward North Korea is they're begging for war, they're begging for war, they're begging for war. Actually, no. The fact is North Korea keeps indicating they're open to negotiations and they're willing to freeze their nuclear program if the U.S. stops threatening them. And the corporate media will never mention that. They'll talk about the missile tests and the bomb tests and all the rest of that other stuff, but they won't mention the fact that North Korea has indicated a willingness to talk. But the U.S. doesn't want to talk. They want a war. Because the economy is coming apart. The American people are very dissatisfied with the way the government is working. And they figure a nice, bloody global war is going to just get everybody to fall in line, because that's what happened the last two times. Crash of 1908, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008, it's a pattern. It's repeating. We see it. Now, the United States is threatening North Korea with a nuclear war. They're actually out there saying they're considering the use of a preemptive nuclear strike. This is a clear violation of the UN Charter. It is the U.S. that is the warmonger. It is the U.S. government that is the aggressor. It is the U.S. government that is invading and drone striking and regime changing all across the globe. And by the way, it's not going very well. But for the people on the ground in these countries, it doesn't really matter who's winning or who's losing. They're just seeing their lives destroyed. Putin is already expressing regrets over awarding Tillerson with the Russian Order of Friendship. Guess you can't take that back, can you? Let's talk about the economic news. A lot of stuff going on there. We have been commenting for a very, very long time that the stock market is, in fact, being manipulated by the plunge protection team, by crooked Wall Street speculators. And let's just see how the market ended up today. Well, they just barely got the Dow into the green. NASDAQ and S&P are in the red. So the PPT is losing traction. But the problem is it's a stock market bubble because they keep using rigging techniques, supply and demand, buy, whatever it is that they do, to push those numbers high. So everybody can point to those numbers and say, see, the economy is in great shape. Look at what the stock market is doing. How can you, just because you're hungry and homeless and you haven't had a job in years, you just look at the stock market. Obviously, the economy is doing good. It's your fault that you're hungry and homeless and jobless. Don't blame us. And, of course, we do blame them. And they've overvalued the market. It's far more overvalued now than it was in 1929. And the bubble is now so massive, even people on Wall Street are starting to say, this has gone on too far. And we have two major bank CEOs have come on out warning about the instability of the market right now. The first was Deutsche Bank CEO John Cryan, who came on out saying we are now seeing signs of bubbles in more and more parts of the capital market where we wouldn't have expected them. And then you have Lloyd Blankfein, who's the CEO of Goldman Sachs, saying in the same week, when yields on corporate bonds are lower than dividends on stocks, that unnerves me. So they're very, very, very concerned. And remember, Goldman Sachs is the world's most powerful bank, not just in terms of money, but political clout. You have 4 out of the last 8 U.S. Treasury secretaries were former Goldman Sachs employees, including the current one. 3 current Federal Reserve Bank presidents are Goldman Sachs alumni. And with that kind of political clout, they can get what they want. Back in 2008, when the financial system was melting down and banks were suffering enormous losses, the government orchestrated a sweetheart bailout deal of which Goldman Sachs was the primary beneficiary. All on the backs of the American taxpayer. And by the way, that is a classic symptom of living under fascism. When the corporations make money, they get to keep it. When they lose money, the losses are transferred on to the people. That is fascism. Benito Mussolini always said, fascism should more properly be called corporatism, because it is the alignment of corporate greed and government power against the general population. Right now, central banks all over the world are dealing with the reality that the party may be about over, and none of them has an exit strategy. This according to an article out of Investment Watch blog. And I've been saying for a very, very long time, the private central banks were set up to basically suck all of the real wealth out of a nation and its people and put it in the pockets of the owners of the private central bank, and they never made a plan on what to do when they finally succeeded. And that is the problem. We're there. They're insanely rich. We're desperately poor. And now they don't know what they're going to do when it all starts to come apart here. Now, as you know, the debate over raising the minimum wage keeps going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, where corporations are saying, well, if you raise the minimum wage, it's going to be more expensive for us to do business. And then there's the common sense reality that if working people are not able to trade their labor, their skills, for decent wages and salaries, they're not going to have the money to go to the shopping malls and buy the products those corporations are selling. It is just common sense. You can't have this degree of wealth imbalance and expect the society to continue to function. Americans are living paycheck to paycheck between rising rents, rising utility costs, rising cost of food. They don't have any money left over to do things like go to movies or buy a new car or buy a new TV or any of that stuff. They just don't. And nobody on Wall Street or in Washington, D.C. wants to look at that reality. They just want to find another way to steer more of the what remains of the nation's money into their pockets. Now, the real reason wages have stagnated in this country is because our economy has slowly morphed, if you will, from a manufacturing agriculture economy to an economy that is based entirely on financialization. In other words, loaning money, making interest on the money, and their focus is on that, buying and selling stocks. And they've absolutely forgotten that you cannot have a strong economy without strong manufacturing and strong agricultural exports. And the United States has neither. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture, and American products are getting a reputation for being overpriced pieces of junk. All right, we're going to go over to the telephones here. Tony in Puerto Rico, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Listen, I have a couple of questions. My first question is this. You think maybe Donald Trump someday is going to sign an executive order similar to what John F. Kennedy signed in regards to Executive Order 11110, or is it his hands are tied? That's my first question. My second question is, was John Wilkes Booth an agent of the Rothschild?
Well, to the first question, I'm sure that Trump is being completely controlled by the people around him, and they would simply tell him that if he issued a new government-issued currency, that the economy would crash immediately, and probably in one of the back rooms, somebody may have said that's one of the reasons Kennedy was assassinated, because of the United States note. As far as John Wilkes Booth being an agent of the Rothschilds, I don't know that he himself personally was, but there's absolutely no question that the European central bankers, including the Rothschilds, wanted Lincoln gone along with his greenbacks because it was a serious threat to the banking structure of the day. And in fact, the European media was writing all these editorials saying what a disaster it was for the banking families of Europe for a government to make its own money and be without debt. And that if this was allowed to continue, it would spread across the globe, and that would be the end of the private central banks. So there's no question that they wanted Lincoln gone. But whether John Wilkes Booth was aware of that dimension or not, or if he was simply thinking revenge for the Civil War, we don't really know. But there was definitely that dimension to the assassination of Lincoln.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. Take care.
Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are now open. Apparently, China is starting to shut down the local cryptocurrency exchanges, and Bitcoin has taken another hit on that. Meanwhile, the dollar is actually getting a bit of a drubbing as well across Asia. And apparently, the dollar has plunged by the most in 6 months during the U.S. Day session. And the dollar is continuing to get pounded all across Asia Pacific, with the Hong Kong dollar and the yuan, especially the yuan, surging. Gold is extending their gains. So they're not able to keep the gold prices under control any longer. When there's that much demand for gold, and people understand that they shouldn't be buying those paper contracts because they're leveraged hundreds to one, of course the price of gold is going to go on up. Now, over in India, they were the first nation to start experimenting with serious demonetization, the cashless society. And they started out by simply banning all large bills and working their way down. And as a result, India's economy is now crashing. It's locking up because people don't want to use those plastic cards, don't want the government tracking them. People like having cash in their pocket that they can just whip on out and buy an ice cream cone or whatever it's going to be. Buying something small like that shouldn't be a major financial transaction involving several banks and a computer network. That's ridiculous. The other day, Claire and I were down at Safeway, and we were in the line at one of the checkout stands. 3 people ahead of us, all of them using cards to buy stuff. And we had to sit and wait while the card was read in, and it went out over the computer network, and it took a long time to come back and say, yes, this is approved, and all this other nonsense. And it's actually slowing commerce down to have a cashless society. Now, one of my favorite stores I like to hang out in is Toys R Us, even though when they first started up, they were really good. They had really good toys, erector sets, Meccano sets, really cool science toys. These days, it's mostly just branded merchandise from movies and so forth and so on. But apparently, even Toys R Us is now in trouble, and they have hired a bankruptcy law firm. I imagine that they're hoping that this Christmas season will bail them out. I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, the Christmas stuff is already in the stores. The Hallmark keepsake ornaments are up on display down again at the Safeway. They've already got stacks of Yule logs ready to go. Right alongside all the Halloween candy and stuff for Thanksgiving. It's just a nonstop. There's a holiday coming. Buy. I think the plan is that you buy a package of Halloween candy here in September, and then you get into it and you munch on it, and then as you get closer to the real Halloween, you have to go buy another one. That may be the thinking behind that. But they're just pushing it out there, and I don't think we're going to have a good Christmas this year. We haven't had, in terms of the retailers. And another really bad Christmas holiday shopping season is probably going to be the final nail in the coffin to some iconic retailers across America. Now, here's a little example of government efficiency. According to census experts, here on planet Earth, the entire planet, there are only 65 people known to be 106 years old or older. Yet here in the United States of America, the U.S. Inspector General says there are 6.5 million people getting monthly Social Security benefits who are over 106 years of age. 6.5 million. And the IRS is saying it's going to be too expensive to fix this Social Security benefit fraud. So they're just going to sit back and let it go on. It's amazing here. All righty, we're coming up here on another commercial break here. When we come on back, we're going to be talking about immigration. There's a real fight brewing between Brussels and Hungary and Poland and some of the other countries, and we'll talk about that when we get back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. This story just crossed my desk just now. Apparently, Libyan authorities arrested a commander of ISIS and discovered they had an Israeli Mossad agent. So, more proof that Israel was on the side of the U.S.-backed terrorists, was actually in there instigating. So, all you ISIS people listening to the show, you're working for Israel. Ha, 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 the joke's on you. We're going to take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Hey, remember that saying, if you don't hold it, you don't own it, for gold or any precious metals? Well, if the bank holds your wealth, then they own you. That's why be your own bank. Very easy.
I absolutely agree. Well, the reason they want the cashless society is for two reasons. One, it allows the banks and the government to track absolutely everything that you are buying. And frankly, it's none of their business if I stop off for a jelly donut on the way home from work, in my opinion. It's none of their business. Second, it prevents the possibility of a bank run because the banks are crashing. You go to the bank and say, I want my savings account, and they say, well, all we can do is transfer it to another bank. They can't give it to you. They're absolutely opposed to any portable store of value in your hands. And yeah, they're forcing you to be dependent on those banks, and dependency is slavery.
I don't want to go into fractional reserve banking. If nobody knows what that is, you can go online and learn about it. But hey, Mike, that's one thing I don't like Bitcoin, because you don't hold it. Per se, it's a digital currency, so you're in the same boat.
I thought there actually was a physical coin that represented a Bitcoin. Not a lot of them, but I thought they actually had a physical coin you could get.
I think it was a digital coin where it's like a code. I don't even know how this whole bit mining thing works.
Yeah, I haven't really gotten into it. I got involved at one point. Trying to set up this thing, and then the state of Hawaii declared it illegal, and the hub that was handling this cryptocurrency basically zeroed out my account, and that was kind of the end of that. So, and I'm one of those people. I want cash. I want to do my business in cash, much less paperwork, instant gratification, and also there's an advantage to having cash in your pocket. You know how much you got. You know what you can spend. And when your pocket is empty, you stop spending. And that's a very important thing. Most of these cashless societies, if your checking account, debit account, whatever you want to call it, runs out, they'll just hop on over to your savings account, or they'll give you a loan, a line of credit, and charge you more money for that. Again, I don't like being forced to be dependent on the banks, especially when you look at how many banks have been caught engaging in outright fraud and are still walking around, the CEOs are still walking around free. They cannot be arrested for fraud in this country. Okay?
Mike, can you hold me over? I want to ask you another question.
All right, I'll hold you over. We're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're talking with Dustin in New Jersey, and you had one more question for me.
Yeah, Mike, I know you were talking about how the United States was removing like ISIS people to move them to another like area to fight again. Remember there was a story in Afghanistan where they were airlifting the Taliban commanders and troops. They were moving them to out of the area where the U.S. forces were. It was either elements of the CIA or elements of somebody else, but they were, I believe it was U.S. people moving Taliban people out of the area. I think that was in Tora Bora, I believe.
Now, are you talking about back during when the Soviet Union was in there, or more recently?
No, when George Bush was in there. I believe there was a story where they were where somebody was either in the military, and they said that there was elements of our government removing certain Taliban, either commanders or certain groups of fighters, to remove them from that area that was getting bombed.
Okay. Yeah. That was back when. Yes, I do remember that now.
It was at Tora Bora, I believe. Maybe it was before the bombing of Tora Bora with the Daisy Cutters. Maybe they removed some elements of the Taliban to move them back. To move them on the chessboard there. A
lot of the Taliban were CIA assets going back to the days of the Soviet defeat in Afghanistan. But when the U.S. went on into Afghanistan to change the government and put in Hamid Karzai, the Taliban started fighting back. But I would imagine that, yes, those Taliban who were CIA assets probably were given safe passage out.
You realize, Mike, how long this garbage has been going on? Not even before 2004, way long before that, but the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, the shoot down of the airliner in Ukraine, which was obviously set up to get shot down. So this nonsense has been going on out for a long time in multiple theaters. It's ridiculous.
Again, look at all the lies that we've been told to get us into one war after the other, after the other, after the other. Again, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, and so forth and so on. The lies never really stop. Truth is the first casualty of war. However, in terms of the shoot down of that Malaysian airliner, I don't think it was set up to be shot down. I still favor the theory that Poroshenko wanted to shoot down Putin's presidential plane, which was in the same area at the same time, and from a distance looks an awful lot like a Malaysian Airlines passenger jet. They're painted in the same colors, very, very similar livery. And I think the pilot just made a mistake and targeted the wrong plane.
I think maybe the Russians should paint their that plane purple with yellow polka dots.
That might be a good way to do it. Thanks,
Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, getting on back to Europe. As we mentioned earlier in the week, the European Union's highest court is ordering the EU countries, the member nations, to take more migrants. And basically, the European Court of Justice ruled that the European Commission, which is this unelected leadership of the EU, has the legal right to order EU member states to take in so-called asylum seekers, and conversely, that EU member states have no legal right to resist those orders. Well, this is not sitting very, very well. And down in Hungary, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade Peter Szijjártó has said that the position of the Hungarian government is that the ruling issued by the European Court of Justice in the migrant quota case is outrageous and irresponsible. So there's going to be a fight over this. The government of Hungary is just furious at what it sees as politically motivated bureaucrats in Brussels interfering in the internal affairs of the member states of the EU. We know how you feel. When the United States was set up, that central federal government was supposed to mind its own business and let the states run themselves. Hungary has come out with another statement, again from their foreign minister, that forcing countries to take migrants is equivalent to political rape. Now, here is a little factor you need to keep in mind. The vast majority of these migrants going into Europe do not meet the requirements to be granted asylum. Only a small percentage can document that they're fleeing persecution or a war zone. Most of them are economic migrants. They've been told that Europe is the land of milk and honey, and they can go on up there and get all kinds of free stuff. And, of course, they're not getting it, which is why they're acting out. They're feeling like they were cheated, and they're taking it out on the people of Europe, rather than going on back to whoever it was who said, yeah, go on up to Europe. You're going to get all kinds of free stuff there. Now, over in Poland, their prime minister is saying that the European court ruling will not affect Poland's migrant stand. So this is leading to a major fight within the EU. And when this whole refugee thing started up, I made the observation that I had thought it would be the predations of the European Central Bank that would destroy the EU. Now it looks like the refugee crisis might do it. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Angela Merkel is still out there trying to campaign for re-election as chancellor. She got pelted with tomatoes earlier in the week, and she had another angry crowd Wednesday who screamed that she was a traitor. So we have this article, again, Investment Watch blog, is the German election being rigged to save Merkel and the European Union? Heck yes. We had that article that came on out yesterday where these white hat hackers, security experts, found that the tabulation system in Germany is as wide open for fraud as the American systems. And right now, massive election fraud is the only thing that's going to keep Merkel in power, and that might actually trigger riots in the streets of Germany. Because if the German people overwhelmingly vote for a change and they get forced back to the same thing, they're not stupid people. They're going to realize they just got cheated, that they're not really living in a democratic system, that they're already enslaved to the coming New World Order, and that's probably not going to sit very well with them. Okay, yet another day, yet another massive data breach. This is Equifax, and this is a credit company, and they have a lot of information on you, and apparently data on 143 million people in the U.S. was stolen. About 209,000 credit card numbers were compromised. This is one of the worst breaches in U.S. history due to the scope and importance of the information exposed. And this breach is different than other situations where data was compromised due to the possibility that consumers may not be aware they are customers of this company. This occurs because Equifax obtains its data from credit card companies, retailers, banks, and lenders, which report on credit activity of individuals to credit reporting agencies. So you may be impacted by this and not know it. It's not like Equifax has a list of addresses where they can send out an email saying your data was compromised. They're not really sure. But this is very possibly the worst leak of personal info ever. And in contrast, hacks hitting Yahoo and other sites may have breached more accounts, but the severity of the data was generally much more limited. In a lot of cases, it was simply not really very useful at all. In most cases, the damage could be contained by changing a password or getting a new credit card number. But again, the issue here is that many people had their information in Equifax without knowing it. Now, supposedly, Equifax has approached the security firm Mandiant to be helping Equifax in the hack aftermath. Now, this is where it starts to get really dark here, because apparently they discovered the hack all the way back on July 29th. And they kept it secret for 6 weeks, during which 3 top Equifax executives sold $1.8 million of Equifax stock. This is Chief Financial Officer John Gamble and 2 other executives, Rodolfo Plotter and Joseph Logoran. Sold a combined $1.8 million in stock. They're bailing out because they know Equifax is going to take a hit on the stock market. That almost qualifies as insider trading, I would think here. And the problems are not over for Equifax because there's now a proposed class action lawsuit. And it's been filed against Equifax shortly after announcement of the breach of this information of about 143 million people here in the United States. Now, the complaint was filed in Portland, Oregon, and it says basically Equifax was negligent in failing to protect consumer data, choosing to save money instead of spending on technical safeguards that would have stopped the attack. Remember what I keep saying? These systems can be made to work, but you can't leave the safety and security decisions up to the money junkies. Oh, we don't need that firewall. You know, we've got to make our stockholders happy. And, hey, we're coming up on the end of the year. We've got to start planning for those big end-of-the-year bonuses for all of our executives. It is a mess. And I think Equifax makes a really good case for just getting rid of your credit cards and going back to a cash-based society. I think the Equifax breach tells us everything that's wrong with the cashless society. When all of your information and all of your wealth are in these computers, those computers will be targets. And so far, nobody is able or even willing to try to stop the cyber criminals from breaking on in there. Now, apparently there is a newly discovered bug, or NSA backdoor, in the Windows kernel that can prevent security software from identifying malware. And the bug affects the PS set load image notify routine. This is one of the low-level mechanisms some security solutions use to identify when code has been loaded into the kernel or user space, which is where a lot of malware likes to do what they're doing in order to be not visible. And the problem is an attacker can exploit this bug in a way that this module returns an invalid module name, which allows an attacker to disguise malware as a legitimate operation. This sounds like something that the boys at the NSA dreamed up here. And Microsoft, it's like they don't really care anymore. And there's apparently a problem with Microsoft's Edge browser. There's a security bypass. And apparently over at Cisco Talos Security, Nikolai Grodum found this cross-site scripting bug that affects older Chrome and Safari plus current versions of Edge. Microsoft says they're not going to fix it, that this feature is by design, and they're not going to patch it, which is another reason to suspect that this is, in fact, an NSA backdoor. And once it gets discovered by the cyber criminals, they will not hesitate to use it. As long as we're talking about computers and software and the deplorable state of the industry right now, in my little studio here on Oahu, during the production of this radio show, I'm using two computers. There's a big one that's Windows 7, and then in order to provide the clearest possible sound quality, I have a separate little XP machine over here that runs Skype, which is what I use to connect to RBN. Well, so Tuesday, right after the show, I get this little pop-up saying that there's an update for Skype, and it is mandatory that if you do not install this update, you will not be allowed to log into Skype anymore. So I shrug my shoulder and I hit the update and it goes on in, and it is buggy as all get out. This is the latest version of Skype. And the biggest problem of all is I can make calls out. I can call RBN. They cannot call me. The calls are coming into Skype, but it doesn't pop up that little window where you can answer the call. And when the call finally ends, when they get tired of listening to the ringtone and hang up, it shows up on Skype as a missed call. That is a very sloppy coding error. And did nobody think to actually test if this new updated version could actually receive a call? And I did a web search earlier today, and apparently a lot of people are having problems with this latest version of Skype. You know, something's working and working well. Leave it alone. Don't update it, don't patch it, don't add features to it. because the trend in the software industry is to just put more features in there, demand an update, and it usually shows up with more problems than you really want to deal with. And it really is getting ridiculous. We've allowed our computer software technology to become so bloated and decadent, it appears the software companies themselves can't really manage it any longer. And I'm sure somewhere there's an executive up there in the tall towers above Microsoft who said, well, we don't need to spend more money testing and making sure the code is okay. We've got to think about those end-of-the-year Christmas bonuses that we're going to write to all the executives. But it really is junk. And whoever is in charge of Skype now, because I think they got acquired by Microsoft, if I recall correctly. They've made it worse. They've made it much worse. Now, there's been another security lapse, if you will, over at the domain registrar Enom. And this is over in Great Britain. And apparently the bug allowed hackers to steal domain names because the system that would verify that you are the actual owner of that domain wasn't working. And some of these domains may have been stolen. And any domains that are hijacked are extremely hard, if not impossible, to recover. Now, this was all discovered by a security firm, the M Group. And apparently they reported the issue to Enom on the 2nd of May. They only got around to fixing it the 1st of this month. They just don't care. Once they've got your money, they just don't care. They're not paying attention. Now, if you are a customer of Amazon, and every once in a while I'll buy something from them, apparently Amazon is not keeping a watch on security for their sellers. And there is a product there called Brushes for Less that basically sells a replacement tip for your toothbrush. And apparently Amazon received a message claiming to be from a law firm saying that there was an intellectual property violation on this product, and Amazon took this product down during one of the busiest shopping events ever, over a holiday weekend. And it turned out it was a complete fraud. This law firm didn't exist. The lawyers that were listed in it are real lawyers, but they work for other firms. The address and phone number didn't check out. Just 5 minutes of detective work would have found that it was a complete fraud. And Brushes for Less lost about $200,000 in estimated sales. And apparently, as Amazon continues to grow, complaints from sellers have multiplied. And this is something that you see when you allow these giant monopolistic companies to come into being, where they're the only players, they're so big nobody can compete, they stop caring about their customers. And maybe it's time to start breaking some of these companies up under the antitrust laws in order to bring back competition. Lower prices, better service, that serves the American people rather than the money junkies. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And interestingly enough, getting back to the hurricanes, like I said, everybody is using it to push their agenda. And there's a video on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com about all these people who are out there saying, oh, it's great that it's going to hit Donald Trump's property there, and this is God's punishment for America for voting for Donald Trump, and absolutely insensitive, heartless comments coming from all these liberals out there. And CNN and MSNBC are blaming climate change for Irma. See, it's all your fault. You wouldn't go along with Al Gore. You wouldn't pay a carbon tax. You wouldn't buy carbon credits. And look what happened to you. This is all your fault. And again, I wish to point out that heat by itself does not create a storm. Storms are created by a temperature differential. And you can get monster storms as much by upper atmosphere cooling as by heating the ground. And again, the proof is in the outer gas giant planets of the solar system, which have storms the size of our entire planet at temperatures hundreds of degrees below zero. So these people don't know science, or at least they hope that you don't. Now, Climate Depot came on out with a point-by-point rebuttal to these warmista claims on extreme weather events. And it is rather meaningless. Extreme weather events have always happened and always will. It's just a matter of statistical probability. And unfortunately, primitive people always looked at cataclysmic weapon as retribution for sinning against the gods. But I would like to hope that we have perhaps outgrown that. And by the way, have you noticed that the same people who insist they know what the temperature of Earth is going to be 100 years from now, we're never really sure where these hurricanes were going to go until like 48 hours before they hit? Now, the reality is, over at realclimatescience.com, they're pointing out so far this month, temperatures are plummeting at all the East Coast and Gulf Coast stations. And right now, so far this winter, we're seeing the 5th largest mass ice gain on Greenland's surface since 1981. Now, yes, we've got 3 monster storms in the Caribbean. But the total number of hurricanes has been in decline over the last 50 years. Now, earlier in the week, we reported on this huge solar flare, actually 2 of them back to back, that left the sun, and they impacted the Earth yesterday. And apparently there were some blackouts on some unprotected systems. And it's another reminder that that big glowing ball of fusing hydrogen up there really does call the shots for the climate here on Earth. Now, interestingly enough, over on Quebec's Gaspé Peninsula, there's this tiny village, and they're trying to face off against an oil company in a legal battle that could end up costing the community $1.5 million. Now, here's what's going on here. Apparently, the municipality of Ristigouche Sud-Est is being sued by Gastern, a Montreal-based oil and gas development company. And they're being sued because back in 2013, they passed a law saying that there could be no oil drilling or exploration near the source of the town's water, which makes a lot of sense when you remember just how often these oil and gas pipes will spring a leak. And so now we have an oil company that's suing this town and its citizens for daring to say, we don't want you drilling for oil near our drinking water source. It's corporatism or fascism. And that's a very, very difficult situation for us all. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We've got some callers waiting on the line, and we're going to start with Guy in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. You know these smart meters, and they've got it on electrical now. They've got them on the water coming into your house. You've got the Wi-Fi in your house. Well, there's a lot of dirty electricity floating around, microwave electricity floating around. And then they got this new 5X system they're coming out with for cell phones.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, though, the reason I called you was I haven't heard of any studies on people that have been getting these solar panels put on their roofs. I mean, that's got to add to the dirty microwave going in. Your house is turning into a manufacturer of electricity.
No,
what's that doing to your body?
No, they aren't, because solar panels are a DC system. There's no oscillating taking place, and without oscillation, there's going to be no radio waves emitted. So, no, solar panels are not going to add to the problem. There is a real problem. I mean, if you look at all the electromagnetic radiation that's in the air from, again, Wi-Fi, the smart meters, ham radio, AM, FM radio, radars, the police radio, the fire department radio, and all of it. I mean, we're literally saturated in this radio energy. And again, they're always out there saying, well, this individual transmitter is not putting out a signal that's strong enough to break molecular bonds. But the sum total together, nobody's really sure. Nobody's really looking. They may not want to find out an answer that they don't like there. And then, of course, you have recent research which showed that there is a behavior called molecular resonance, where low energy radio waves can start molecules shaking and reinforce it until they shake themselves apart. And a real world example of that kind of behavior would be the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, otherwise known as Galloping Gertie, which was hit with this wind, and it just started bouncing up and down, and more because the wind was driving this resonance until finally the bridge literally shook itself apart.
Very interesting. Well, thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Mario in the Netherlands. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, aloha, Mike.
Aloha.
How are you?
I'm fine.
Yesterday, I saw this article in Zero Hedge. Trump wants to end the debt ceiling. Schumer agrees. Did this article catch your
Yeah, I did catch it, and again, it's basically an admission that the federal government can't get its spending under control. And
this intention, I'm sorry, this intention to eliminate the requirement to have a debt ceiling means he gives to the Fed the keys of the country. The Fed will be the owner there.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
It's incredible, and nobody talks about this. He's putting the chains around the neck of every American with this.
Well, Trump didn't do it. I mean,
this guy has the common sense of a businessman, but he's doing quite something very tricky and very dirty here.
Well, it may have been sold to him on the idea. Let me get a thought in here. It may have been sold to him on the idea that we have been through this dog and pony show many times over the last several years about, oh, the government is about to hit the debt ceiling. There's going to be a shutdown. We're going to have all these problems, and the politicians screaming at each other about spending cuts and raising taxes. And then in the end, they always say, yeah, we're going to have to raise the debt ceiling. And the American people are getting very cynical about that. And maybe somebody said, you know, let's just not do that anymore because it's not making us look good to the American people. Now, as I understand it, they haven't gone forward with that. We still have a debt ceiling. It was raised in that bill that provided the hurricane relief funds. In a typical way that Congress behaves, they'll put something that's very unpopular as a rider on a must-pass piece of legislation, and that's how they'll get it through there. But yeah, if they simply do away with the debt ceiling, it's an admission. The federal government cannot manage its own money. It's just going to go on borrowing like crazy and increasing inflation until the dollar is worth nothing.
And the money system itself, the money system, has a bankruptcy in its own design, because there's no coverage for the interest obligations. Everybody who understands a bit the money system knows this. The moment such a money system starts, there will be an obligation to pay back the principal and the interest. And nobody has ever made the money for the interest. That coverage doesn't exist.
No, you have to borrow more money.
The principal from another loan.
You have to borrow more money and use part of that money to pay the interest on the earlier money, and that is the debt trap of private central banking, because the instant
exactly, and this is why the debt growth is perpetual.
Yes, it is. It's designed that way. to trap us all in hopelessly unpayable debt to make us slaves to the private central bankers.
I know. And instead of going to the problem and have the solution of nationalizing the money machine, the Fed, instead of nationalizing the Fed, it gives the Fed the ownership of everything, of everything. It's incredible.
Ultimately, yes.
Becomes the solution itself, which will never be.
No, ultimately...
You cannot solve a problem with the same problem.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, the federal government is basically giving up any pretense of being able to balance its budget. They're looking at these wars that are stuttering and failing, and they don't want to have to deal with the debt ceiling anymore because the Federal Reserve is just going to print up however much money they think it's going to take to turn these wars around and lead to eventual victory. And when they fail, as I'm pretty much convinced they're going to, there's going to be this absolutely astronomical, unpayable degree of debt, and we're just going to have to repudiate it, saying this is all odious debt. We, the American people, never agreed to this. Congress went out, rather the president went out on his own, Congress went out on their own, and just decided they were going to break free of any kind of restraint and just have the party of their lives.
I cannot believe this guy does not understand this. I cannot believe that. He must have a very bad consciousness to do this.
Again,
and by the way, yeah, sorry.
Okay, again, he may have simply been told that, they're going to have to go on raising the debt ceiling anyway. Let's stop doing that whole pretense of fighting about the debt ceiling and let's just take it away here because the U.S. is in a position where they're going to have to go on borrowing. It's out of control. It's spiraled totally out of control, and ending
out of control. And he means to get out of the hole by digging it deeper and deeper.
Well, he's not going to get out of the hole. He's like every other president that has been in office for the last 100 years. He's going to do what it takes to look good right now for the next 4 years, or possibly 8, and then he's going to say somebody in the future will figure out a solution to this. Forgetting, of course, that Andrew Jackson already had a...
This is very sad and very worrisome. And by the way, you talked about the eternal war. We'll get eternal funding with this because there's no ceiling. There's nothing. They can borrow as much as they dream of.
Yeah, they absolutely can. I mean, what the government really should be doing is just, what Kennedy did with Executive Order 1110 rather. Just start issuing your own money to fund the war. What Lincoln did. What Mario? Will you stop interrupting me? Okay, I'm really getting a little frustrated here.
Yeah, all right.
All right.
Go ahead.
It's what Lincoln did with his greenbacks. Is he funded the Civil War rather than enslave the American people to the bankers' interest. And every president has the authority to do that. Congress can revoke the charter of the Federal Reserve anytime that they want to, but the Federal Reserve is a very generous donor to congressional campaigns. And these are all people who think first and foremost about themselves and their own good, and then the good of their supporters and backers, and somewhere way down on the bottom of the ladder, their constituents.
Yet they should be confronted with these consequences and put into discussions in front of the television camera.
Well,
congressmen.
Right now, members of Congress, politicians, the Federal Reserve, they'll only talk to the corporate media because they know the corporate media will ask the correct questions and not hit them with anything embarrassing. And that's another reason why they're trying to find a way to shut down the independent media, because we're out here pointing out the flaws in this theory of private central banking. It is a huge scam. They've been perpetrating it on the human race for over 300 years now. And it's made the people who own these Federal Reserve banks, primarily the Rothschilds, so insanely rich, nobody even dares put them on the lists of the world's richest people out of fear that it would start a riot overnight.
It sounds like the end of sanity if they even think of ending the debt ceiling. This was my point.
Well, I think we went
off.
Thank you for your time. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. I think the government went insane all the way back in 1913 when they allowed the creation of that Federal Reserve. because that's when we lost our country to those bankers. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Dennis in Omaha, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Dennis, are you there? Dennis?
Yeah, I'm here.
You're on,
Can you hear
me? You're on the air. What's on your mind?
A quick question. What if Trump knows that if he continues raising more money and borrowing more and more money, eventually he can do a bankruptcy and clear the whole debt?
I don't think the rules for a nation state operate the same way a business does. Ultimately, what's going to happen is there will be some event that renders the paper currency worthless, like happened in Zimbabwe, where people were walking around with paper notes in their pockets that said $100 trillion. And they were worth, what, 27 cents? You can still buy them on eBay as a souvenir for like a couple of bucks.
Okay, I was just thinking. Thanks.
All right, you got it. No, what will happen is the U.S. government will print up a bunch of Treasury bonds, send them over to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve will in turn create all sorts of new money to pour into the government's spending accounts. And it's a double shuffle to conceal the fact that this is all being made up out of thin air. Except, of course, when you're asked to repay these debts, you're not allowed to just come up with the money out of thin air. You have to go on out and do something for somebody who's got some of those pieces of ink and paper to pay you with. That's the enslavement mechanism right there. And that's what private central banking is all about. Private central banks do not serve the community. They do not serve the people. They do not serve the nation. They serve themselves. Now, getting on back to the news here, apparently Jennifer Lawrence is one of those people who's out there shouting that Mother Nature sent the hurricanes to punish America for voting for Donald Trump. They really are getting delusional over there. Now, do you remember this whole Russia meeting with Donald Trump Jr.? Well, they finally got around to basically revealing what was in Manafort's notes about that meeting, and they're saying that it actually doesn't have any damaging information about Don Jr. It's another nothing burger. But we made Trump look bad. We made Russia look bad. We're still pushing that link between Trump and Russia. I mean, 10 months this has been going on. Nobody is buying it. You'd think at some point they would quit, but I guess they haven't thought of anything else they can do. Getting on back to the hurricanes, and we're seeing constant updates, and again, Irma's track has shifted slightly to the west again, but the storm is so huge, it's just going to wipe up the entire state. And a lot of people are very unhappy over the price gouging that was going on. Apparently, United, American, and Delta Airlines are accused of price gouging Hurricane Irma evacuees anywhere from $547 to $3,200 for a ticket to get out of Florida. And we've been hearing about all these companies that were selling cases of bottled water for like $100 plus a delivery charge. Like I said, these disasters bring out the best and the worst in people. It's not a pretty portrait of America's business class to see these kind of stories. Now, as you know, we've often talked about the high cost of college, how it's been turned into just another mechanism for plunging people on that debt hook as early in life as possible. And we've come to find out that the high-paying jobs that college recruiters are luring kids into the college with just don't exist. And so, to nobody's surprise, according to an article in the Wall Street Journal, Americans are losing faith in college degrees. They ran a poll of Americans out there and more and more people are saying college isn't worth the cost because it has become more expensive. There's very little financial aid, but by golly, they'll loan you money. They'll loan you money to get that college degree. And most of those college degrees are not going to lead to high-paying jobs because the jobs are just not there. They've gone to other countries. College used to be about an education. Now it's just another racket to fuel the debt-based economic system. Now, apparently, researchers from Nemours Children's Health System and the University of Central Florida have found an innovative way to prevent the incidence of neuroblastoma, the most common cancer among infants. And basically what they did is they're using nanoparticles to deliver curcumin to tumor cells. And the authors of the study said that delivering the curcumin through nanoparticles methodically targeted and destroyed treatment-resistant neuroblastoma tumor cells. It actually looks like a cure rather than a treatment, which means we'll probably never see it again. Big money in cancer treatments. Curing sick people is a failed business model. You cure them, they pay you, they go away, you never see them again. You treat their symptoms, they're back. Month after month after month after month after month. The medical industrial complex is unconcerned with your health, just about getting your money. And that goes back to Richard Nixon and the Health Maintenance Organization Act. We're going to take a break for commercials. We got a caller waiting on the line. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take a couple of phone calls here. Rick in Milwaukee, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, good afternoon. Aloha to you as well. I'm calling this afternoon to talk about the new Tom Cruise movie scheduled for release called American Made.
Yes.
Allegedly the story of Barry Seal.
Yes.
Now, what I know about this is this movie should have come out a year ago with the title Mina. And what I'm calling, what I ask you is to pick your brain. Did Tom Cruise get a call from the narcocracy to water down the script? Or what are you willing to share with your audience about this?
Well, if anybody gets a call, it's not going to be the actor. It's going to be usually the executive producer, who in turn will go over to the writers and say, we need you to take this out and this out and this out and this out. But I think, as I understand it, the current version of the film briefly mentions Barry Seal's connections to the CIA, but basically tries to let them off as just sort of being a bystander situation.
Right. I was under the impression that Barry Seal had a video recording of Jeb Bush and George W. Bush unloading bricks of cocaine into his aircraft at the Tamiami Airport in Dade County.
That's not my
keeping him.
Well, maybe
that's what was keeping him alive. That was. Go ahead.
Well, I'm aware of the videos that he made of the people at the other end of the smuggling pipeline, including a top government official in Nicaragua loading the drugs in. I'm unaware that he had tapes of the Bushes, and I can't imagine the Bushes themselves actually getting that close to the actual drugs themselves because of their public visibility. I would expect that there were going to be underlings involved in that. But Barry Seal did have a lot of information which was thought to have disappeared after he was assassinated, but again, it was found by Roger Morris and Sally Denton, who wrote up this article based on the information. They took it to the Washington Post, where they were working at the time. It was cleared for publication by the Washington Post's own lawyers, and then it was spiked by managing editor Bob Kaiser, who was a Skull and Bones alumni with George Bush. And so, again, the system will protect itself. Again,
of course.
Yeah, when the movie comes out, I'll be interested to see what's going on and how much they talk about the involvement of the CIA. But I'm not expecting it to be a new Oliver Stone style JFK.
Right, I'm not expecting a hard-hitting expose from Mr. Cruise.
Well, but he certainly looks a lot better than the real Barry Seal.
Oh, Death Warmed Over looks better. Hey, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Mike. Love your show.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. And Alan in Texas, real quick, we're almost at the end of the hour. What's on your mind?
Thanks for taking my call. I just want to mention real quick, I used to be a Democrat. I have a little bit of insight on what's going on with the Democrats and Antifa and everything. One thing I want to stress is that before, when they thought Hillary was going to win, they were still going to be violent because they were talking very openly in circles.
I remember that. Alan, I hate to cut you off. There's the music. We got to take a station identification, and we'll be back with the lovely Lady Claire. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on BAM User, this gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire, who likes to come on in and our third hour Friday to have her unique perspective on the world. So can you scoot your chair in just a little tiny bit?
There we go.
So there, you're in the field of view.
All right.
And what's the first thing you want to talk about?
Well, this came to us this morning from Zero Hedge, which I consider a very sober and usually quite responsible source. China tips its hand how it would prevent a U.S. attack on North Korea. And the unanswered question of the past several weeks is, what would China do to prevent a U.S. attack? Well, the Chinese began to answer that question with military exercises and deployment of air defense forces designed to expand the roles of anti-missile units in size and scope of the territory they were defending. What they called it was a drill to fend off a surprise overseas attack. And you don't have to guess too much as to who they believe the overseas is going to come from. The attack is going to come from.
All right, hang on a second.
Yes.
Well, looks like your mouse has died.
Oh no! Oh dear.
All right, let me just real quick change the battery.
All right. But China has consistently, as has Russia, been adamant that there is to be no military solution. And they have both been cooperating in terms of really working to prevent such a thing from happening. And the other thing I'd have to say about this is right now, Mike, and I think you'd agree with me, the American military is singularly unprepared to fight a war against China over North Korea. It doesn't have the weaponry, the money, the troop strength, or the manufacturing to ensure a positive result in a conventional war.
Well, that may be, one of those may be the reason why there's actually talk about just eliminating the idea of a debt ceiling entirely, so the U.S. government can borrow whatever paper money it needs from the Federal Reserve to ensure victory and then stick the next 100 years of Americans trying to pay that debt back.
Yeah, which tends to be the standard operating procedure. There was another article, this time from the Hits the Fan, and Jim Kunstler is warning that America is about to become an even more fragile place. And what he meant by this is we have a lot of acreage of America under a lot of water, and more water is coming. The western United States seems to be burning up with wildfires out of control, And are we going to have the infrastructure to be able to bounce back from all of this? And this is a real question.
That's a very valid question here right now. And again, one of the reasons we're seeing so much destruction, especially out west, was that the existing infrastructure was being neglected. Because in order to fund all of these wars against all these other countries around the world, funds for things like fire prevention, keeping the fire break roads open and cleared, was simply cut. And now we're basically feeling that pushback from having allowed that to happen.
Yeah, you cannot you can't do that for a long period of time without expecting some sort of blowback, and unfortunately we're dealing with it.
Well, we're hearing now that engineers in Houston were saying 20 years ago that they needed to improve their flood control.
Yeah.
And again, somebody just said, we don't need to worry about that. It's never going to happen. And, of course, inevitably it did. And it's kind of amazing to realize how much of a bias towards war this government has, because they won't hesitate a moment to buy bolts that cost $37 each, $400 toilet seat. Thousands of dollars. I mean, I got to see a lot of this up close and personal when I was associated with NASA, and then later when I was doing some work on the Strategic Defense Initiative. And at the same time, there's no money for America's homeless children. And it really is, we have a central government that is in a wartime economy. Take it away from the American people, spend it on war, and then after the war is over, we'll get around to fixing how everything that broke down in the interim. The problem is that things have reached such a deteriorated state in the United States that the damage may be irreversible. And I can think of no better example than the irrigation system in the western half of the United States of America. Now, you need to remember the western half of the United States is a desert. And decades ago, this giant construction project was put together to bring water out and green up these areas for agriculture. And today that system is delivering only about 1/3 of the water it was designed to deliver, and much of it is leaking through cracks in the aqueducts and the pipes into ground where it serves no purpose whatsoever. And again, there's the Fire Break Road situation. And we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And what is your next story?
Well, I'd like to go back and focus on what's going on with North Korea, because it seems to be several shades of intertwined insanity. And this comes to us from Stephen Lenman, who is very much a progressive, but very honest, and a lot of times I must agree with him completely. And this comes from Global Research, which is a Canadian blog.
Yes.
And this has to do with Washington's draft on the UN Security Council resolution on North Korea. And in its current form, the U.S. knows that this resolution will be absolutely unacceptable by China and Russia. Okay.
Okay, yeah. Got to keep the cursor on the thing here.
All right. And this is what it's calling for: an asset freeze and travel ban on Kim Jong-un and other designated DPRK officials, designating additional WMD-related items, including specific materials, equipment, goods, and technologies, designating conventional arms dual-use munitions, and related items, including specified materials, equipment, goods, and technology, designating vessels used to transport coal, its purchase by other countries, prohibitive, authorizing UN member states to, get this, interdict and inspect North Korean vessels at sea in international waters, banning exports of crude oil, condensate, refined petroleum products, and natural gas to the DPRK. Now, Sergei Lavrov is someone for whom I have a great deal of abiding respect. This guy is an adult in the room in the vicious playpen, which is international politics. But I have to tell you very frankly that the way the language has been structured, ensuring that China and Russia cannot possibly approve this resolution, may well be the trigger which will enforce the Treasury's threat to impose a ban on all U.S. trade with dozens of nations that trade with North Korea. And, such sanctions cannot possibly be construed as anything but a prelude to war against it, Mike. I mean, I'm scratching my head over here. Can you talk to me about this?
Well, there's two things to keep in mind. First of all, when you board somebody's ship in international waters without their permission, under international law, that's considered an act of piracy.
Yeah.
Okay. Second of all, China does a lot of business with North Korea. And if the U.S. were to impose a trade embargo on China, the American economy would implode. Because we can't make our own vacuum cleaners and washing machines and TVs and iPhones and the rest of it. We buy much of that from China.
Yeah, and we don't have the infrastructure to make it anymore.
They're trying to bring it back here. In fact, the other day we were talking about how the U.S. is still dependent on buying rocket engines from Russia.
Yep.
Apparently, the U.S. government has invested over $1 billion trying to put together a rocket engine manufacturing plant, and they can't get it to work.
Whoa.
Because all the people who know how to make it work are either old or retired or dead, or they've been lured away to other countries with very attractive offers.
Right.
And so if there's a trade war with China, all those big box stores that you like to go on down and get things at, those shelves are going to be empty.
Yep, absolutely. And there was an interesting report from Iran that I read in Sputnik today. This was a couple of days ago, but I thought, go Iran, because Iran has condemned Pyongyang's nuclear tests and said war looks like it's imminent without talks. And this is according to Iranian parliamentarian Morteza Safari Natanzi, who is a member of the country's National Security and Foreign Policy Commission. And he went on to state that Iran is against nuclear weapons tests by any country and strongly condemns Pyongyang's latest test of an alleged hydrogen bomb. And it's based on a religious decree, I believe, called a fatwa in Farsi, by Iran's leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Tehran is totally against any production of weapons of mass destruction, he said in an interview.
Which is weird, because Nikki Haley is up there at the United Nations laying out a case that Iran has failed to comply with the P5+1 deal, therefore we have the right to go on in and bomb them.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And it's really, it's nasty. Now, I've just checked before I came in to do the show with you at 28thnorth.org, which is a group that studies. It's out of Duke University, and they study pictures and satellite images of goings-on with the North Korean tests. Now, I cannot see anything that looks as though there is activity there today, but there was not an update today, so I'm not sure.
Well,
but,
I would imagine that, the activity precedes the test when they're digging out a new tunnel and placing the device, and after the test, they're going to be looking at what came through the test instruments. There really isn't a reason for them to be going back in there.
Yeah.
There is a concern that satellite photos are showing a lot of landslides were triggered by this last test.
That's scary.
And there is a concern that this particular mountain may be unstable.
Yeah.
And, of course, were there to be a major Earth movement that exposed these caves where the nuclear test took place, a lot of radiation could come on out. If I were Kim Jong-un, I would be looking for a new mountain right now.
Yeah, I mean, he's got to have some geologists to go and examine the situation and tell him if he can or he can't and what he needs to do. And our dear Ambassador Nikki Haley, I don't know, and I'm trying not to be cruel, but every time she opens her mouth, she puts her foot in it. And recently she has debuted Trump's case for ending Iran nuclear deal. And while the UN ambassador, Haley, certainly didn't come to the American Enterprise Institute, which, by the way, is hawkish to the point of being to the right of Attila the Hun, she insisted she wasn't there to bury it either. But I think she protests too much, because that's exactly what it appears she was sent out to do. And she said, I'm not making the case for decertifying the agreement, she told her rapt AEI audience. I'm just saying that if he, the president, should decertify, he has the grounds. Haley then warned for what would not be the last time that we shouldn't just assume that Iranians were doing everything right. And she said, what if they weren't doing the right thing, Haley pre-proposed. And when that 10-year expiration hits, they start a nuclear war. Ambassador Haley, I need a word with you, please, very quietly. I checked today, and your Wikipedia bio says the following. She graduated from Clemson University with a bachelor's degree in accounting, which is all well and good. But the one thing I noticed that there is absolutely zero part of her education where it was ever documented that you were studying any courses in physics, nuclear technology, or nuclear weaponry. Now, those highly trained and skilled members of the IAEA, who do have the education and training to make an intelligent judgment on these matters, have certified Iran to be conforming on all aspects of the P5+1 for the 8th time in a row since the accord was reached. And under what grounds can President Trump possibly claim decertification when the IAEA claims that there are no grounds for his doing so? And I would also refer her to that Iranian parliamentarian who came out, and we just did the story on that, and he said, we don't want to see any nuclear weapons anywhere. We've got research in that. And this is not exactly a country that is going to do any kind of a war. And so
well,
I have to ask.
It's not in their history.
Yeah. And so I have to ask, Ambassador Haley, this is the country from which the U.S. expects a nuclear war when they have initialed no wars whatsoever over the last 200 years?
Initiated no wars whatsoever.
Yes, thank you.
And certainly
Yeah.
not since 1979 and the Iranian Revolution when they kicked out the U.S. puppet, the Shah.
Right. And the world understands very clearly that Israel desperately wants a regime change in Iran, but only at the cost of American blood and American money. And I have to say, whatever Tel Aviv is paying her to projectile vomit this codswallop, it can't possibly be enough, Michael.
It is insane. But again, we have a U.S. government that is desperate to get the war agenda back on track because everything else they're doing has turned into a disaster. And the American people, polls are showing the American people do not trust that federal government. They don't believe anything that they say. They think they're doing a terrible job on the economy, on taking care of this nation.
Yep.
They're opposed to this whole refugee situation. And again, the history is every time the U.S. government gets into an economic mess like this, they get involved in a world war to try and get out of it, or at least distract everybody from the problems at home, or have somebody to blame. You know, it's not our fault the economy is crashing, it's those gosh darn Iranians. But you're absolutely right. Donald Trump does not have any legitimate grounds for decertifying the P5+1 agreement when you have the IAEA that is in there inspecting all the time. And that's something else that Nikki Haley was misrepresenting, where she was out there saying we should just take it on faith. Iran isn't doing anything. No, they're not taking it on faith.
They're inspecting.
Iran is subject to inspections. And the people doing the inspection who know what they're doing are coming back and saying Iran is not building nuclear weapons.
That's it.
Well, the issue here, what's really going on, is that Iran is bolstering its non-nuclear defensive capability. And so the rush is on to find a way to start a war with Iran before they can build enough medium-range missiles or artillery to basically deter an invasion, which that's why they're pushing right now. 10 years from now, when the P5+1 deal expires, Iran is going to have a formidable conventional military, and that's going to make it very, very difficult to invade them.
And I'd like to raise another point. Those conventional missiles were never, ever a part of the P5+1.
Absolutely
they weren't even touched.
Absolutely not.
Well, I'd like to bop over to another part of the Middle East. The Israeli intelligence chief is saying military working to attack enemies near and far. While refusing to confirm or deny reports of Israel's overnight attack on a Syrian military base, IDF military intelligence chief Major General Herzi Halevi bragged of the Israeli military's capabilities, saying that they would continue to attack enemies far and near. Major General Halevi made it very clear that when he says enemies, he means Iran, playing up the threat posed by Iranian forces in Syria as well as Iranian forces in Iran. He played up the precision intelligence with which Israel was able to target them everywhere and anywhere in the region. And these comments were also echoed by Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman, who has also dodged the question about attacking Syria, but said that Israel was ready and determined to defend ourselves. And playing up the idea that this would be also against Iran. Now, Mike, I've made an observation over the last several years. For Israel, defense for the Israeli government is most generally translated as offense against peaceful countries in the region with which it steadfastly refuses to get along. But I would like to offer a caveat to both Major General Halevi and Defense Minister Lieberman. Any Israeli-generated war against Iran will almost certainly mean a war with Russia, as both Russian military and civilian leadership have collectively gone on record as stating that should Iran be attacked, Russia will come to Iran's aid militarily.
And, of course, the United States has already committed to defending and supporting Israel in any war, even if Israel starts the war. And there is your war between the United States and Russia.
Exactly. And, I am very annoyed at this. I think... Okay.
Well, let's put this on hold. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And Aloha America, welcome back to the show. And by the way, the phone lines are open again, 800-313-9443 if you have a question or a comment for the lovely Lady Claire. So what is your next story here?
Apparently, an anonymous anti-BDS boycott, divest, sanction group against Israel published its very own blacklist of boycott supporters in New York. And it's a shadowy website identifying New Yorkers believed to support the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement for Palestinian rights, placing their photos, social media links, and email addresses on a blacklist located at outlawbds.com. The list features 97 individuals divided into the categories of campuses, public and NPOs, and private sector activists. Among those who appear on the so-called blacklist are professors, journalists, students, nonprofit staff members, and executives. And Project Outlaw BDS claims it was established by a group who consider themselves to be analytical in their approach to the BDS movement, whose stated intention is to provide support for New York State Bill number S2492, the latest attempt to pass anti-BDS legislation in the state. Well, there's only one problem with that. The only language Israel seems to understand regarding their treatment of the Palestinians is not humanitarian, it's not logical, it's not analytical, it's economic, Mike. This is why, in my humble opinion, as a Christian pacifist activist, the BDS movement needs to continue to have an effect that may cause some changes in Israeli policy.
Well, there's something else that's behind it, and that is boycotts are a recognized form of peaceful protest. And ultimately, any laws that are attempting to protect Israel from a boycott are clashing directly with that First Amendment right of freedom of speech to peacefully assemble and petition for redress of grievances. And everybody who votes for these bills is obviously putting the interests of Israel above the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And frankly, they need to be voted out of office on the assumption that we have an honest election system, which we don't.
Absolutely. I would like to also go over to an issue that really bothered me upon reading it. This came from antiwar.com, which, again, I consider a very thoughtful and responsible blog. And the article was titled "The Slow Poisoning of Our Soldiers' Families on U.S. Bases." Now, it's generally understood that the U.S. Armed Forces are among the world's largest polluters. It is not generally recognized that some of the most significant pollution occurs here in the United States at military bases and facilities. As most pollutants have the greatest effect on those whose immune systems are not fully developed, read kids, babies, their impact on military-dependent communities, whose population are disproportionately young children and pregnant women, are an area of particular concern. Everyone living in communities which host military installations, however, they're all at great risk, Mike, of something called chronic toxicity, the exposure to and ingestion of toxins over an extended period of time. And it can be devastating even to those who have fully developed immune systems. And I have one comment on this. This government cannot possibly be for the troops while they still allow this slow-mo poisoning of our troops and their families to continue. Mike, this has got to get sorted right the doggone heck now.
Well, you need to remember that military mindset, which is, we need to win the war now, and to heck with long-term concerns. And that is a feature of virtually every war and every military commander, that they're going to have that attitude. And in many cases, the military are exempt from U.S. environmental laws, which is why they get away with this stuff. Interesting little side note. Everyone now knows about Groom Lake, the secret testing airbase in the Nevada desert. And oddly enough, it was one of the U.S. government's best-kept secrets, and how it was finally made public arose from a lawsuit from the family of one of the workers at Groom Lake who was killed by exposure to toxic chemicals. Got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to our show here, and this may be a good time to try and mention something that involves us personally. We have a good friend. I'm not going to name any names or anything because I don't want to get this person in trouble. Military veteran, and just went through chemotherapy for stage 4 leukemia, which is very, very serious. And based on that article about the toxic condition of U.S. military bases, of which we are surrounded by them on all sides here in Oahu, could very well have been caused by that. Well, he got the treatment he needed, the chemotherapy and so forth. And the doctors said that he needed physical therapy to try and regain his mobility from this long period of being inactive. And amazingly enough, his insurance has refused to pay for it. And I did a little bit of research. And for those of you who are dealing with that same situation, I remember the old Addams Family TV series. And there was one show about this insurance company that was trying to cancel the policy with Gomez Addams because he was engaged in such very dangerous pursuits and everything. And the boss says there are two aspects to the insurance game: taking the money in and refusing to pay it out. And it does feel like that a lot. So I did a little bit of research, and basically insurance companies love to refuse payment, but that's usually not the final word. All health insurance companies are required to have an appeals process where you can go on in and say, please explain this decision. If the doctor is prescribing physical therapy, why it's not going to be covered. Now, we don't know the actual details in this particular case, but apparently there's a trend or a tendency for insurance companies to just automatically reject these and hope that people will go away. But when they come back and they go through the appeal process, quite a few of them will see the insurance company reverse the decision and go ahead with that much needed coverage. And again, coming out of Obamacare, it's the same thing. This was just another cash grab by the health insurance companies. And again, this individual, this friend of ours, is a military veteran, served his country. And now the country is basically turning its back on him. And we were looking at this, remember the Obamacare, the so-called death panel, where they were going to have this so-called independent group that was independent from everybody, that was simply going to say, past the age of 75, which our friend is, that certain treatments and could be denied. And basically say either a long-term care home or a hospice. So this is just right now, it's happened to our friend, it's in our face, it's a very, very real thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And this gentleman and his wife are just the sweetest couple that you could ever imagine. Very active in the church I go to and very consistent and just beautiful people. And I really hate seeing this kind of stuff happen to such good people. I'd like to bop on now over to Russia. And Germany is making the claim, heaven only knows why, and I can't fathom it, that Russia was planning to send more than 100,000 troops to war games in NATO's eastern flank this month, disputing Moscow's version that it would only be 13,000 Russian and Belarusian servicemen who would participate. The September 14th through the 20th exercises are known as Zapad, or West, in Belarus, the Baltic Sea, Western Russia, and the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad. And all of a sudden, NATO's getting an upset stomach. In spite of Moscow's assurances, the troops would rehearse a purely defensive scenario.
Well, let's get a couple of things straight. First of all, NATO has been massing huge numbers of troops and weapons and armor all along the Russian border. And inside the Russian border, the Russian government has every right to send however many military they want, anywhere they want, for the purposes of training or defense. And so Germany is trying to just take this and turn it into a negative. How dare the Russians position troops to stop us from invading them? What's wrong with those people?
Yeah. And the German defense minister, Ursula von der Leyen, said, "It is undisputed that we are seeing a demonstration of capabilities and powers of the Russians." And she made that statement at an EU defense ministers meeting in Tallinn. And by the way, any of you who are from Estonian background, I would love to see your country. I've seen it in books and it looks just beautiful. And she went on to say, anyone who doubts that only has to look at the high numbers of participating forces in the Zapad exercise. More than 100,000, she said, at a joint news conference with her French counterpart, Florence Parly. Now, I think this lady is getting a bit hysterical, Michael. Getting a lot hysterical.
They're trying to turn this Russia's doing something really bad, but as you point out in your talking points, Russia runs these exercises all the time. They've been carrying out the Zapad exercises for a number of years, and nobody ever said anything until it became necessary to grab something with which to demonize Russia yet again.
Yeah, and by the way, why has NATO seen fit to absolutely surround and encircle Russia's borders with NATO's troops over the last several years? Isn't that something that you do as a preparation to war?
Well, we're the good guys. We're allowed to do that, and the Russians are the bad guys here. I want to make an important point. Vladimir Putin is not going to invade Europe. Vladimir Putin is not coming to invade the United States of America. He's already got enough problems managing Russia. Look at Europe today. It's bankrupt. It's overrun with these migrants from the Middle East. Crime is out of control. Corruption is out of control. Same thing here in the United States of America. What would Putin gain by taking on our problems on top of the ones he already has? He's not going to do that.
No, and he's probably laughing himself silly. Here's a gentleman who is usually, and Mike, I'd like you to comment on this, he's about a million chess moves ahead of his American counterparts.
Well, you know how
all
the Russians love chess. The Russians love chess. I used to play a lot of chess, and then my iPhone started beating me, and I quit because I won't stand for that kind of uppity behavior from appliances. We have a caller waiting on the line, Al in Canada. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Hi, Lady Claire. I'm just curious, you were talking about insurance and, you know, the fact that the very first response to them is don't pay. That's the way it is. Don't pay. It doesn't matter. It happens in Canada, too, with car insurance and other nonsense.
Okay.
We all know that insurance is a scam. But I'm just curious, how much does health care cost in the United States? You know, how much do you pay in a month or whatever, a year?
Well, are you talking about the health insurance or the actual cost of the medical care?
Well, the medical care is going to be like a tenth of what the medical insurance costs, but...
Well, our medical care...
what would it cost?
Under Obamacare, it's actually kind of scaled to your income. And right now, it's going up double digits every single year. So and Claire and I are now both on Medicare, so we don't have to deal with that nonsense anymore. But there are families who are literally saying they can't afford health insurance under Obamacare. They're going to settle and pay the IRS fine, but the IRS is raising the fines almost as high as those health care premiums. And again, it's just a cash grab from the American people. But the United States right now has the world's most expensive health care, and it's ranked something like 38th, 39th in actual quality and efficacy.
And that's appalling. That's absolutely appalling for the money
because it's been turned into another racket to make certain individuals very, very wealthy.
And I think that people's... Go ahead, Al.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I think that people would be absolutely flabbergasted if they knew how much presidents of some of these insurance companies were actually making, what the package looked like relative to them squabbling about something relatively minor in a case.
That's exactly what I'm getting at there.
Yeah.
Those dollars and cents, because I know, like just up in here in Canada, let's just say dental care.
Yeah.
I can go get my teeth cleaned for $75 cash, but if I have an insurance policy, it's $150.
Wow, double the cost, huh?
Well, that's because the insurance...
Well, yeah, and that's nothing compared to health insurance, which I've sent Mike a couple of graphs. I remember that one about McCain?
Yes.
With the highest health care premium raise in 1 year. It's a scam. When will people realize that all insurance on the face of this planet is a scam? If you actually consider saving the money, if you want to call it that, instead of giving it to the health insurance company or any other insurance company, you'd be a lot farther ahead.
There are a lot of people who are simply avoiding health insurance of any kind and prefer to just pay off their medical bills. The downside is if you have a major illness or injury, you are going to be wiped out. And medical bills are, I think, the third leading cause of personal bankruptcies in this country. Mm-hmm. Now, up in Canada, the reason why your teeth cleaning is $75 cash, but $150 when you go to the insurance, is the insurance companies, when they negotiate with a healthcare provider, they'll demand a discount. And so what the health provider will do is they'll inflate their prices, so they're getting what they need to get from the insurance companies. Here in the United States, they don't make a differential between a cash payment and an insurance payment. What they do is they raise the prices to get past the discount demanded by the health insurance company, but if you come in without insurance, you're paying those inflated prices, and that's another reason why health care is so expensive in this country.
Well, it's expensive up here in Canada, too. And I hope I can fit this in. Carpal tunnel surgery is about, the actual surgeon that does it, and it's usually a plastic surgeon, gets $150 a hand. And you're in and out in about an hour.
Yes.
$150. That's what that doctor makes. I would rather pay him that $150 than go through all this bureaucracy, and it's inflated up to what, maybe $2,000, and that's probably low.
Well, Al, don't forget. I mean, just that doctor by himself, he can't do that surgery on you. He needs an operating room, sterilization procedures, instruments. He's probably going to need at least one surgical assistant. And the rest of it. So there is a legitimate reason why the bill to the hospital is more than just what the surgeon himself is making, and you need to take that into account. But again, here
there's also probably 10 or 12 people standing on his shoulders getting paid as well.
Well, again, there was that chart that showed that administrative personnel are growing in the healthcare industry way out of proportion with the number of actual health care providers. Only so many doctors. Yeah, it is. That's what it was all designed to be. Again, going back to Richard Nixon and the Health Maintenance Organization Act. That's what turned medicine from being about curing people into another money-making racket, and they're just milking the American people with it.
Well, you're all Keynesians now. Richard Nixon really pulled a fast one on the American people.
Oh, several, Al.
In that 69-70 era.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, well, ending gold convertibility, starting that whole petrodollar deal, starting the EPA so that they could grab our lands and pledge them as collateral on government borrowing. Yeah, Nixon was a real piece of work. And it's kind of frustrating. The only living president I've ever met in my entire life was Richard Nixon. It was before he was president, and he was good friends with my grandfather, and it was just after he'd lost to Kennedy, and I was a little kid, but even then, I just got this horrible feeling from him.
Mike and Claire, have you ever seen that video on Nixon when he was older, when he was asked about LBJ, on his feelings about John F. Kennedy, where, basically he smiles, and says that LBJ didn't like to play second fiddle or something like that, and then he's got this big smile.
Well, again, getting back to the Kennedy assassination, there were a lot of players involved with that. Do you remember Mary Jo Kopechne, who died in the back of Teddy Kennedy's car at Chappaquiddick? She was roommates with one of Johnson's aides, and it was through her that Johnson learned John F. Kennedy was going to drop him during the second term. And that would have been the end of LBJ's career. And so right there is a strong motive for Johnson to be involved with it. And then, of course, he turned around and he yanked the rug out of one of the major agendas, which was a new invasion of Cuba, because he knew that would lead to a nuclear war. He knew about the secret deal between Kennedy and Khrushchev following the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yep. It's if nothing else, your country is very fascinating with what goes on, and it's all that almighty dollar, you know.
Yeah,
we know.
Filthy lucre and the
that
rest of it.
almighty dollar.
Yep.
Well,
I appreciate your time. Thank
all
you.
right, thank you very much. The dollar isn't as mighty as it used to be, unfortunately, and that may actually be a good thing. I think, I have to be very honest, I think planet Earth as a whole would be much better off if the U.S. government collapsed the way the former Soviet Union did and just vanished into history. And ended all of this aggression and regime change and all the rest of that stuff, this empire building. So anyway, what is your next story?
Well, this is from the Department of You Cannot Make This Stuff Up. And in Anti-War, again, there was an article about the Syria report, which got withdrawn from the U.S. Holocaust Museum, which, by the way, the article links to. And the Daily Intelligencer noted yesterday the U.S. Holocaust Museum is at the center of a real hot controversy over its decision to conduct a study through its Simon Scott Center for the Prevention of Genocide about whether the United States could have taken a more active role in the Syrian civil war for the sakes of protecting civilians, hundreds of thousands who have died in the conflict. And they are pinning a lot of these atrocities, allegedly, on Bashar al-Assad. And the guy who is making these accusations is a gentleman by the name of Leon Velsetier, and he's a very staunch Zionist. And he was very unhappy that the U.S. government was essentially doing limited things to force regime change in Damascus. And that was not going to happen, in spite of the U.S. government's having funded, trained, and armed many of the jihadis who were supposed to make the al-Assad regime crumble. That is, until Russia got in there.
All right, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program today after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our Pauhana Friday program here. And getting on back to Israel and Syria, the problem is, the global perception is that the war in Syria is winding down and Assad has won. He's going to remain the leader of Syria despite, what was 5, almost 6 years of the U.S. trying to get him out of there.
Absolutely.
Aided by Israel. And Netanyahu, who's trying to dodge corruption charges in Israel, is in a panic because he is now seen as having backed the wrong side in the Syrian conflict. And that is going to erode his support both with the Israeli people and within his own government. So that may be the reason why Israel is up there bombing more Syrian forces, trying to get Assad to do something.
And Assad is just playing it cool.
He's playing it cool.
Yep.
But again, what Israel wanted out of all of this was the Golan Heights. And they've gone ahead and basically they've occupied them. They're already drilling and selling the oil and gas underneath that, even though technically it's the property of Syria. Mm-hmm. If Assad stays in power, then his next step is going to be to tell Israel to get out of the Golan and go back within his own borders. And Netanyahu's not going to want to do that, but he may not have support in his own home for an outright war against Syria, given that they apparently are getting ready to try another stab at Lebanon as well. So it is a really confused mess over there. It's a very volatile situation.
And Mike, what do you think Russia's going to do about this if Israel increases this bombing into Syria?
Well, Israel, like the United States, does not have any legitimate reason to be there. They're committing acts of war on Syria. And I can't imagine Putin wanting to do this, but at some point Putin may step on in and say, we're going to protect our Syrian allies from Israel. Israel's going to scream to the U.S. government, save us from the evil Russians. And again, it opens the doorway to a major world war, which at this point, we all know it's coming. We just don't know where the starting place is going to be.
Yeah, where the fuse is going to be,
where the fuse is going to be lit. Yeah. Okay, one more story here.
One more story about Irma in Florida. And apparently we now have 2 Florida nuclear plants, and they're in Irma's projected path. One is already leaking. And where the leaking is coming from is the Turkey Point plant's old cooling canal system. And it's already been leaking polluted water into Biscayne Bay. That's not good.
No.
The New York Times noted last year that a study found elevated levels of salt, ammonia, phosphorus, and tritium, a radioactive isotope that is found in nature but frequently is associated with nuclear power plants.
Now, it is very difficult to find tritium in nature. I think the New York Times is trying to calm everybody down and say, it's in nature, and yes, there's some here, and it's no big deal, and don't worry about it.
Like the guys in Fukushima said originally.
Like the guys in Fukushima. Tritium is a byproduct of nuclear fission. It's created in small amounts. In its commercial applications, gram for gram, it is the most expensive substance on Earth. But you certainly don't want to be drinking it.
No.
And if it combines with free oxygen in the water, it becomes water, radioactive water. And you don't want to be drinking or bathing in that. There's the music. Time for us to get on out of here. Have a really good weekend. Please stay tuned for the John Stadmiller program. He's got a lot more interesting information to share with you. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.